Now, the good thing is, I had my brothers there. My brother Dave was there. My brother Augie was helping me through that situation. My dad was there. My sister Yvette. Well,
You've moved into that segment too quickly. So, you have to give me an opportunity to ask questions. You can't just continue. So that was life at 15. What happened next?
yeah, so, I told you that there were some things that went a certain way when I left the church at 15, right? Started doing street things, did, smoking marijuana, ended up, starting to use PCP, following behind the older crowd. So PCP, they call it boat, sherm, fresh, butt naked, because a lot of times people would get high and take their clothes off and run down the street bucket nakeds.
That's intense.
It is. So fast forward to the age of 17. So I went out with a friend of mine. We were getting high. We was hanging out at somebody's place, and he was goofing around out of his mind, so on and so forth. I was too. Khalil's mom was still pregnant with Khalil. And she was there with her cousin playing Super Nintendo or whatever. And they put me in the bedroom. And then probably about no more than 10 minutes later, they heard a thump. They went in the kitchen to see where my friend was, because that's where we were initially. He wasn't there. They checked the bathroom. He wasn't there. They checked the bedroom, and I was still in there sleeping. And come to find out, when they went back into the kitchen, they noticed the window was open and the screen had been pushed. So
what floor were you all on?
The third story floor. It was an older building. And those older buildings back in Jersey, there's a basement in every building. And there's outside concrete steps that go down. So he fell and landed on the steps. So here it is. I left with my friend. At the age of 17, we went out supposedly to have fun, which really is really not fun. It's doing stuff we're not supposed to do. And I come home and, I'm the only one that made it back home. And it was a big ordeal. It was a very big ordeal. And the crazy thing is that I had stopped for a few weeks, but then I had picked back up. The other thing that happened to me that year, so later on, Khalil was born. Right? Jose Miguel, Khalil Maldonado. And well,
you've moved into that segment too quickly. So how was that sobering enough to make you stop? I mean, you were consistently getting high. I mean, I understand that it's a big thing having a friend pass away, but were you in a state of mind where that was able to get you straight? I don't know. It's It's like you're consistently high. You don't use good judgment. Like, so how is him dying enough to get you to like stop?
So you're not consistently high,
Okay.
but you're not thinking straight either.
Anytime.
Anytime someone takes a mood altering substance
Okay.
on a regular basis, and this could be every day, and this could be every 2 or 3 days, right? But so the reason why for me, I didn't get high every day, my brain wasn't going to be able to take it.
What do you mean by that?
So if you smoke, PCP or angel dust or something like that, right? So what ends up happening is it's like you're very high when it happens. As you come down, and let's say later on that night you go to sleep, but there's still some effects of the drugs that's still there in your brain, even though you're not still high. There's some change in your brain, and this is not scientific, but there's some change in your brain that the synapses are not clicking, connecting. You're not firing on all cylinders. And I can tell you this because when I finally decided to put those things aside, and thank God I did so at an early age so that I can pick up my adulthood and move on with life and move upward. About 2 weeks later, I started noticing, not just feeling differently, but like thinking differently, seeing things differently. Okay, that's how that goes, right? So it's almost like having a cloudy mind, even though you're not high all the time, but you're getting high enough in the type of drugs that you're doing that keep you in this cloud. So I was 17 too. I got younger folks, they make a decision to do this or that. And I said, are you sure you want to do that? And they're like, well, when you know, you know. You don't know. You know why? Because you ain't even seen life yet. So at that age, I knew obviously something so traumatic, lose one of your best friends like that, right alongside of you. Something tells you, hey, pause here for a second. But there were a lot of things I didn't understand. If you notice, people who suffer from addiction and go to rehab, there's a whole program there. As a matter of fact, in Spanish, we don't call it rehab, we call it program. So you go to a program. It's not just time away from people, places, and things that allow you to get high or cause you to get high, but there's therapy there, right? So they're addressing any psychological issues. If they notice any mental illness, a lot of rehabilitation centers have staff professionals for that, or they can give, referrals, what have you. There's group sessions, right? So now you got individual therapy, you got group therapy. They educate you on the perils of using drugs. They have other people that come in and talk to you about their experiences. They got doctors and clinicians that come in and talk about the effects of this poison and how it affects you. In the Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill W. community, they talk a lot about family, right? To the point where you have Al-Anon, where you have support for the families too, because they tell you your drug use, your addiction doesn't only affect you, it affects the people around you. Yes, absolutely. So much so that you probably have noticed families that have an addict, the addict does have to live this subpar life, right? But you probably notice that the family members are suffering, sometimes more so than the addict themselves, because they're worried about them. They're worried that, something can happen to them. They're not in their right mind. They're around the wrong people, in the wrong places, doing all the wrong things. I don't know if I could discern all that at the ripe age of 17. Now, the good thing is I had my brothers there. My brother Dave was there. My brother Augie was helping me through that situation. My dad was there. My sister Yvette happened to be there. It was a big ordeal. So, and it affected me, regardless if I started using again or not. It affected me. It was so much so that, when I finally had met my first wife, sometimes we would talk and she didn't know about that episode. And I said something and I burst into tears. And she said, hey, are you okay? But here it is a year later, I'm still processing this.
Right. So you're 17. You've just experienced the sobering experience of watching your best friend pass away. What happened next? How did your life change from there?
So I was still using here and there. And then my son, Khalil, was born. I tell people, and we've had conversations about parenting. So here it is. I got this brand new bouncing baby boy, and he's named after me, right? And I think I did not really appreciate the weight of parenting, probably not until like a couple years later, around the age of 19. But even at 17, I thought about this. I have another me, a little me.
Another life that you're responsible for.
Yeah. And so there was joy in that. So that was very significant because that was my firstborn.
So at this point, you're almost 18. We've talked about where you grew up and your families. Can you give us a rundown of who they all are?
Yes. So there was my mom and dad, Juan and Carmen Maldonado. Then my siblings, Johnny, who was Juan Jr., Chia, who's Carmen Jr., Gano, who's Danny, Augie, Maida, Dave, Jeanette and Yvette, which are the twins, right? Odd fact, both Maida and Dave are left-handed. So those are the last two of my parents' biological children. Yes, both left-handed. Just thought I'd throw it out there.
And what about your biological family? Do you know anything about them?
Yes, so that's interesting. So I did meet my biological mother. I've met one uncle, talked to another uncle on the phone often and on Messenger. There was my Aunt Ann, my cousin Tanya, cousin Jeremy, cousin Jason, cousin Monisa, her daughter. So I have some uncles in Puerto Rico, biological uncles. But the one that I mentioned, Angel was my mother's youngest brother. He was a baby when my mom's name is Maria Luisa Figueroa, my biological mother. She had 8 siblings, I believe. I'm not sure. Because, you go into something and then you realize, like, okay, this is one character I was looking for. Okay, oh, no, there's this one. And then, 2 weeks later, well, there was these 2 others here. And then there were these over here. So apparently her father, so my biological grandfather, maternally, my biological grandfather and grandmother divorced at a certain point. They had 4 or 5, maybe 6 children. Not all of them are alive at this point. But then my grandmother, when she left the girls that she had with my grandfather with my grandfather. But he had to work at nighttime. So he would tell them, look, stay, be quiet because you're not supposed to be here on your own. Keep the lights off. So sometimes he would leave out for work and then get up maybe a quarter of a block, look back, and someone turned the light on. He would double back, say, didn't I tell you to turn the light off? Now, obviously, I didn't see any of this, but this is what I was told.
What you heard.
So eventually, my grandmother found out that they were staying there by themselves.
How old were they?
They were little. They all went to orphanage.
Mm-hmm.
I can still look up my Aunt Ann from the archive photos of that orphanage where she's in class in like a Catholic school uniform. And she looked less than 10 years old.
Okay.
And so she's the middle one. So my mom was the oldest, I think, of the girls. And then Aunt Ann, and then it was my Aunt Edith or Iris, who's no longer with us.
Okay.
Yep. So they went off to orphanage. My grandmother took the baby, her youngest son, with her back to Puerto Rico. And she raised him there with her family, but she remarried. So another 4 children or so came out. I'm not sure, I didn't count, but I met them recently. I met them back in 2023. I'm going to be honest with you. They were happy to receive me and happy to meet me for the first time. My Uncle Angel, before I even met him, once he knew I existed, he called me from Puerto Rico. We're on the phone. This man got so emotional that he just broke down on the phone. So much his wife had to pick up the phone and finish the conversation, you know?
Why do you think he got so emotional?
I don't know. So one thing I do know, and we can get into this a little bit later on, was so apparently my mom never forgot that they took me. So she was essentially wondering where I was in her mind, but she couldn't. She was powerless. She couldn't do anything about it. Now, even though she was 20, she was still a part of some institution where she couldn't freely just leave or do what she wanted to do or what have you. So, and even if she could freely leave, I don't know that she would have anywhere to go. She came out of orphanage, right? So, but my Aunt Anne recounts to me that she went to visit her there after she enlisted in the military or something, and she wanted to stop by and see her before she shipped off. I think that's the story. And she was saying, well, they took my baby. So my Aunt Anne was like, what baby? Right? And she was like, they took my baby Michael. So she asked some of the people. So somebody came over and said, oh, she's just talking about this doll, and handed my mom a doll. She just thinks it's a real baby or this, that, and the other. So somehow at the facility, they didn't want my aunt to know that she had gotten pregnant, had me. I was taken from her right from the hospital, and that I existed.
Why do you think that was?
I don't know. The only thing I can attribute that to, I think it's just, it was the times. You know, if you go back 50, 60, 70 years, or maybe even a little bit further, there were a lot of things that people felt in society, it's better if you just cover it up or hide it and never mention it again. Right? Mm-hmm. And that would solve everything. But the thing is, this stayed in my Aunt Anne's mind. So what I didn't tell you was I met my Aunt Anne first and my cousin Tanya, her daughter. The three of us became these super sleuths. And that's how we found my mother. But she had told me, she says, your mom told me that she had a baby named Michael, and she asked me to please find Michael. So all these years in the back of my mind, I was thinking, where's this baby Michael? And here all these years later, I found you. And it was amazing having that conversation with her, because here it is. This lady probably thought she could never keep this promise, right? And she had long been disconnected from my mother and had essentially fulfilled the promise without my mom even knowing. And then when we met her, we finally ended up having a reunion December of 2021. So that was very interesting. I'm still in communication with them today, and it's been an interesting ride. Now, I will tell you this, without going very deep into it, I'm glad I had the years coming up Maldonado, because it kind of prepared me for that stage in life. It's a lot of characters. It's a lot to take on mentally, emotionally, and so on and so forth. And then, God forbid, the situation in that family circumstance is not the same that I grew up under.
Right.
So you have to figure out how to navigate through that. And you can't navigate so much from a distance because it's your family, right? So if they call on you, like, what are you going to do? I mean, we're blood. We might not know each other as well as I do with my current family, right? But it's blood no matter what. And, blood is blood. So.
And did they call on you?
So, I mean, they have not, everybody's self-sufficient, but I think my mother, there was more of a tug from my mother because I saw she needed things. She caught COVID and was hospitalized, and she lives in Virginia, and I happened to be working in Virginia that week when she was being released from the hospital, and she had nobody there at home. So I drove down from Charlottesville 4 hours to stay with her. I was only going to stay with her for less than a day, but just make sure that she got situated. help her out around the house. And I noticed that her clothes weren't washed and there's no washer inside the house. So I took her to the laundromat, kind of got all that stuff squared away. The thing about duty and responsibility, when it falls in your lap, you have to do something with it, right? And a lot of people pick it up and they try to put it to the side or pawn it off. The problem is this is not business. I can't just delegate this, right? And I am the only child to my biological mother. I have no biological siblings. Now, she told me she wanted to have another child later on, but she told me they did something to her at the hospital. So I don't know if they tied her tubes or whatever the case is, but she was not able to physically have children after having me. And it wasn't something that happened naturally where something went wrong in biology or something. It was some sort of medical procedure.
Right.
So my brother Johnny, to me, he's like, I look at him as one of the three wise kings. This guy, I kind of feel he missed his calling. He could have been the type of guy that could go places, other countries, and free the hostages, just sit down and just talk to the folks. Always be diplomatic, about things, even keeled. Very tough on the inside, though, right? But it was a perfect mixture, right? He knew when to be tough and when to be compassionate. My brothers, Dave and Gano. So to me, I kind of see them like as the enforcers when I was coming up. Because I came to the home, my dad was 46, right? So by the time I get into middle school, my parents are already, in their 60s. So my brother, Dave, was a cop all his life. And, I had some behavior issues in middle school, and he swooped right on in, boy. Let me tell you something. He was straightening me out.
Scared straight?
Let me tell you something. To the point where, I remember I called him and I said, hey, I got in trouble in school and I got suspended. And I called him at work. I knew the police station number by heart. And he says, you know what? This, that, the other. And when I get there, I'm going to jump on your ass like white on rice. Boy, my soul was shook. No one was home. I was by myself. And I figured, let me tell him first before anybody calls or they call home and tell my dad and my dad calls it. Man, let me tell you something. But when I look back at it, at the moment, children don't understand, right? Because a correction is being applied. I go back to something I heard a few years back, right? Unruly children or unruly boys grow up to be unruly men. So
do you believe that?
Well, I tell parents, I said, hey, you know what? Either you correct them or when they get older, the law is going to have to correct them. And God forbid they're in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong person. And, something happens, at that point. No, so I think that a lot of the woes in society, how people act in a way that kind of add to the deterioration of the fabric of society is from childhood trauma. And that could be anything. When I mean anything, it could be, maybe your parents were to this or to that, to left, to right. Maybe dad wasn't there and mom had to work 2 jobs. That's a lot. I always thought that if we can get back to fixing the home, the family, we can fix societal woes. I always thought Gano was a bit tougher than Dave, but Dave is the one who I had more interaction with. Mm-hmm. So now this is the crazy part though. So here it is. I have siblings that are authoritative. As I've thought back on my childhood and thought about having my dad, Johnny, Gano, Dave, and Augie, because now we live spread out, but back then they all lived in town, right? And I don't know what chance I would have had in any given situation in my life that I've experienced that could have gone either way. I don't know that I would have landed on my 2 feet if it wasn't for that sort of intervention at that level. So I've always told people, if you got a parent, an older sibling who digs in your butt, right? If you've got, if you have friends, I've always said the friend that criticizes you, that's your friend. They're just going to tell you about yourself. Right. The one who always agrees, get rid of them. They're of no use to you, no value. They're just there, whatever you do is cool. And it's more like convenience, or maybe your plight is the same at the time, right? So it's almost like trauma bonding, situation bonding at the time. I'm just saying, the person that sometimes you find that they're critical when you don't want them to be. Well, guess what? They're being critical right at the exact time the universe has called them to be. Mm. And if we pay attention, we can extrapolate some truth from that. And if we can figure out how to apply that, adjust ourselves little by little, maybe we would have an easier life or less stress, which contributes to a lot of things. Mm. I think Les Brown said, if you do what's hard in life, life can become easy. But if you do what's easy, life's going to be hard. So I've already mentioned that Maida was like a second mother to me. So we were extremely close. Chia, she was working on Wall Street. She would commute every day. She would catch the train into the city, New York, and commute back home. And I remember one winter, she had these, Chia used to like the best of everything, And she studied at Rider College, which I think now is Rider University. And she studied, I think, 1 year in Spain too, right? So I've always thought, for the lack of a better term, I always thought she was kind of high sedity. I mean, she's the Bloomingdale shopper, and and those things were big back then, right?
Right.
So she used to wear these leather isotoner gloves. It was wintertime. I never remember. She used to carry this attaché bag. So I don't know. I must have been like 9. So that little baby 6-month picture where I'm sitting like on a bed with a white headboard playing with some blocks, that was Chia's room. My dad made a room of the attic, and that was her room. And it's crazy because it was a lot longer than any room in the house. Right. So she ends up coming home, puts down her attaché bag. I don't know what she went downstairs to go do, but little kids, we roam into people's rooms, this, that, and the other. So
got into her purse?
I see the gloves on top of her attaché bag. It's wintertime. I said, man, you know what? These would probably be good.
In the snow?
In the snow.
Oh my God.
You see where I'm going with this already? Mm-hmm. Let me tell you something. I went out. I had snowball fights, this, that, and the other. These gloves are getting drenched.
Oh my God.
From the wetness of the snow, right? So what do you think I do with them? I come back and put them right back where I found them.
Oh my God.
When she found out, when I tell you, that was the first time I ever had seen Chia just become livid. Oh man. She basically threw the gloves at me and said, here, keep them. They're no more good. I had ruined these nice gloves that she had purchased. And, it goes back to kind of like what my parents taught me, don't be touching other people's stuff. But again, I was a kid and I thought that anyway. But yeah, that was interesting. But she told me something. Chia taught me how to write a check. Hey, the name goes here. And then you put this here and boom, boom. Then you go into the registry and you write it so that you can balance. This is before we had online banking, right? And Quicken. This is before Quicken. So she told me then that she wished she had become a teacher, right? So she did her time in the financial sector in New York City. She decided to stay home and start a family, her and her husband. So I think when she had her second kid, she started volunteering at like his daycare or something, right? And then she started and then I think they gave her a job there. But you got to remember, this woman is educated with a master's in education and so on and so forth. I'm sorry, she had a master's in something first. I think her MED came later. But she realized, you know what? I guess she saw it. This is my chance to kind of be the educator I always wanted to be. And that's what she did. She got certified as a teacher. And then later on, she finished her MED and became an assistant administrator. So she had 2 full-blown careers, and she retired as a school administrator. So, but I remember her telling me, right back then, that she always wanted to become a teacher. So she was the side of, I don't know, I could look at her and tell that there are better things out there than what I've seen in life. Right? She did not allow us to speak slang in the house. If I would say, if she would hear me say, "Oh, I ain't doing nothing," she said, "No, it's not nothing. It's nothing." Right? And it's interesting because as I got older, I started listening to how people spoke and proper English, and I realized, like, you know what? One day I'm gonna have to speak proper English if I want to make it somewhere in life.
So she was maybe one of your first inspirations that there was more to life?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And don't get me wrong. I could say I was close to Knight, I was close to Dave, but I was close to all of them. You know, Johnny taught me some things. I remember Johnny, he studied karate. And he came to the house one time, and we had a porch that had a wood floor, and then we had cement steps, maybe like 5 or 6 steps to go down to, towards the sidewalk. And he was teaching me about push-ups, and he was teaching me how to do push-ups on your knuckles, right? And then when you come up, you quickly slap your hands and then come back on your knuckles, Yeah, when I tell you, I can name a whole bunch of things that I learned from them. And let's say Augie. So Augie actually lived in the house sometimes, right? And Augie was a mason, carpenter. I mean, this guy, if you left him on his own, he could build a house. And I know, don't get me wrong, I've seen people build houses and you need help. You can't do it single-handedly. But he had a talent. I mean, he would tile a bathroom. I remember back home, they opened up this, I think it was George's Fried Chicken, something like that. And they had got a building. He remodeled it. I mean, this place looked, spectacular. So he was good with that. I think Dave was better with the plumbing type stuff. He would help my dad sometimes come over, change out the hot water heater and whatnot. Gano was more of a mechanic. He was more like a car guy in terms of working on cars or doing this. And he would help out friends and whatnot. And he could build a little crane and pull an engine out of a car and what have you. So, I got a little bit of all of them so that when I come out in the world and I see men who are less functional, I can't say, well, I can't say, well, you're not a man because you don't know these things. Because I essentially instantly had 5 father figures, male figures in my life.
That's a lot.
It is.
I'm sure they taught you a lot.
Yep. Now, when it comes to the twins, it's a whole different story. Here you go. Anyway, this is my story. Can I finish my story?
Okay, go ahead.
Shoot. Okay. It's not in the budget, but we'll write a budget for it.